News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moskow.
Karen, we begin with the latest on efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has refused President Trump's request for a 30-day ceasefire. The Kremlin says Putin agreed only to decrease attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure while imposing several conditions, including suspending U.S. arms and intelligence support for Ukraine. However, the White House readout says Trump and Putin agreed to an energy and infrastructure ceasefire. Trump spoke last night with Fox News.
Well, you have a situation where you have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not a war that was supposed to happen, and it did happen. So that's where we are. And right now, you have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough.
Although Ukraine was the focus of the call, the White House also says Presidents Trump and Putin discussed improving bilateral ties, including, quote, enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved.
Well, Nathan, there's plenty of reaction around the world to the Trump-Putin phone call. Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, tells Bloomberg's Balance of Power that he was expecting the worst.
I was expecting that we were going to hear that the president had agreed to recognize Russian occupation of Crimea, agree to Russian demands for elections in Ukraine and things like that. So the fact that we didn't hear those is better than if we had.
And Karen, President Trump is also weighing in on his trade war with Canada. And in his interview with Fox News host Laura Ingraham,
one of the nastiest countries to deal with is Canada. The people that, now this was Trudeau, the people that good old Justin, I call him Governor Trudeau, his people were nasty. And they weren't telling the truth. They never told the truth.
Still, the president says he'd rather deal with Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party and the new Prime Minister Mark Carney to resolve his dispute with Canada. Trump also took a jab at the Conservative who will be running against Carney in the next election. He says Pierre Poilievre is, quote, stupidly no friend of mine.
Well, Nathan, President Trump may be facing a new dispute with Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts. In an extraordinary statement, Roberts said it's not appropriate to call for impeaching federal judges over their rulings. That's after President Trump posted on Truth Social that the judge who ruled against him on deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members should be impeached. Bloomberg law host June Grasso says Judge James Boasberg is not the only one under this kind of pressure.
An impeachment has already been filed against one judge who made a ruling in the Doge case over the Treasury data. And so with more calls for this, I think he's just trying to step out there and say, this is not the way to go. And it's not the way to go.
As Bloomberg law host June Grasso, President Trump is not backing down after Roberts' statement. He told Fox News many people have called for Judge Boasberg to be impeached.
And later today, Karen, President Trump will meet the chief executives of more than a dozen oil companies. Industry leaders say they have plenty of reasons to give thanks to the president. He's an unabashed champion of U.S. oil and gas production and has vowed to unleash the industry's potential. However, the president's threatened tariffs are stoking industry concerns about potential economic declines.
Well, Nathan, political turmoil is roiling markets in Turkey. The lira and stocks are sinking. In fact, at one point, the lira plunged more than 10%. Investors are dumping the nation's assets after the arrest of a key rival to President Erdogan. Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, has been detained a day after Turkish authorities revoked his university diploma in a move that could bar him from challenging Erdogan in the next presidential election.
Well, here in the U.S., Karen, futures are moving just a bit higher following another day of losses on Wall Street. The S&P 500 fell 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 slid 1.7% as mega-cap tech stocks led the market down. Stuart Kaiser, head of U.S. equity trading strategy at Citi, says there may be more pain ahead.
Is there more to come? I mean, I think if you believe that a lot of this was driven by policy out of Washington and the key administrators down there are telling you basically to hedge and that there is more to come and that they're willing to tolerate some short-term pain for these longer-term structural reforms, then, yeah, it does feel like there's potentially more behind this. It's hard to think that the headlines that have driven this are finished.
Citi's Stuart Kaiser says options traders are pricing in a 1.2% move in the S&P 500 either way following today's Fed decision.
And that decision, Nathan, Nathan, with the backdrop of all of the geopolitical concerns, comes at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. We get a preview with Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
Expect an underwhelming Fed meeting today. No change in the benchmark interest rate, no change in the dot plot, and no major change in policymakers' economic forecasts. It's tariffs, of course. The administration doesn't plan to reveal its import tax program until April 2nd. Once it has details, the Fed can start modeling impacts on the economy. But with inflation sticky and the labor market steady, there's not much officials can or should do right now. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Karen Moskow.
I'm Nathan Hager, and this is Bloomberg.